So we really want our children to leave our school believing and knowing that they have the tools and power to advocate for themselves and others, be activists in the world in a variety of topics, and ensure that their voices are heard, whether they are given a seat at the table or not.
From Columbia University, you're listening to Human Rights Education in Action, an episode where we will explore how human rights education translates into local realities. While human rights are often viewed from a legal perspective, over the past semester, my peers and I have been studying human rights through the lens of education in the class Human Rights in Education. Part of this course involved exploring how human rights education has both advanced and challenged justice within communities. The idea of education and human rights as two concepts coming together began with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights established in 1948. In this document, Article 26 states that everyone has the right to education. This being said, it wasn't really until the 1990s that the UN began more seriously outlining how states should incorporate human rights into their education systems. This commitment to integrating human rights into education was further emphasized in 1993 at the World Conference on Human Rights in Vienna. This conference and the document that came out of it, the Vienna Declaration and Programme of Action, emphasized the importance of human rights education and the need for education to promote understanding, tolerance, and respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. The World Conference on Human Rights in Vienna paved the way for future education initiatives, such as the UN Decade for Human Rights Education, which took place from 1995 to 2004 and was led by the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. This initiative marked a 10-year period focused on promoting education about human rights. This decade helped bring awareness to human rights education and led to the development of the World Programme for Human Rights Education to continue building on the achievements of the Decade of Education and to advance the implementation of human rights education program globally. This initiative is still ongoing. All of the initiatives I just mentioned led to the adoption of the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights Education and Training in 2011. This declaration aimed to establish an international standard and framework for promoting human rights through education. The declaration outlined three main elements of human rights education that are important to note before we embark on our conversation. First, education about human rights, which is centered on knowledge and understanding of human rights frameworks and principles. Second is education through human rights, which focuses on developing skills to uphold these rights. And third is education for human rights, which is about adopting practices that reflect human rights values in the learning process itself. Each of these methods of incorporating human rights into education serves different purposes and has different outcomes. Over the years, the UN has consistently urged member states to integrate human rights principles into their educational systems. But what shouldn't come as a surprise to many is that implementation doesn't always match aspiration. Human rights education still has a long way to go in terms of achieving widespread global implementation, especially in countries like the US, where anything political discussed in K-12 schools has the potential to be seen as indoctrination. This tension between a country's perception of the purpose of education and the principles of human rights education results in the UN's efforts to implement widespread human rights education being met with resistance. This being said, numerous successful cases of the implementation of human rights education have been reported at the local level. This podcast will focus on human rights education in the United States, specifically New York City, due to its diversity, proximity to us as Columbia students, and the growing need to empower students from marginalized communities to advocate for themselves and their communities given the current political climate. While we recognize that human rights education with its various modalities aims to promote justice, my group and I sought to explore the current implementation of human rights education in New York City schools and classrooms that choose to incorporate these human rights principles. So we decided to investigate. What does human rights education look like in practice? This brought us to PS 125, the Ralph Bunche School, a public elementary school in Harlem. Named after the first African-American Nobel Peace Prize laureate and UN diplomat, the school seemed like the perfect place to start. We sat down with Principal Yale at PS 125 to talk about what human rights education looks like in a classroom, how students are introduced to these concepts, and what challenges arise when trying to turn global frameworks into everyday lessons.
Would you mind introducing yourself and sharing a little more about your work in your school and about your school and what you do as a principal there?
Oh, well, we don't have a long enough podcast time for what I do, or what we do as a school, but my name is Yael Leopold, and I am the proud principal of the Ralph Bunche School, PS 125. I find it ironically great that you all are doing a podcast on human rights and education, and our school is named after the first Black person to win the Nobel Peace Prize, Dr. Ralph Bunche. No coincidence there, I don't think, but a pretty amazing person. And we have a pre-K through fifth grade school with around 270 students. We are incredibly diverse, and we don't mean diverse in the typical sense that New York's schools use, but really diverse in the sense of New York City being one of the most segregated school systems in the country. And our school is actually reflective of the population of people and diversity within our city. So we're racially diverse, linguistically diverse, socioeconomically diverse, religiously diverse, and many other factors as well. And so we have a saying in our school that says, with great diversity comes great responsibility. And so we really appreciate the fact that our school is so diverse and that we can ensure that we are affirming and our children that go here and their families and our staff, as well as being an incredibly inclusive place.
Yeah, thank you so much.
We're also located in the heart of Harlem. I think that's important because Harlem is the mecca of the world. So
Yeah.
we'll include that in there also.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the broader role of education at PS 125?
Yeah, so our mission at the Ralph Bunche School is that education is social justice. And so I believe our mission is to create a joyous, inclusive environment for children in grades pre-K through fifth grade, where school is an extension of their family and inclusive of their family, affirming of their community and the neighborhood in which they live and grow up in. And also that we provide them with the platform for which they can grow, nurture their interests and their strengths and their ideas, make friends, and learn to have empathy for the world and people around them. And lastly, and most importantly, I'd say, is to cultivate advocates for social change. So we really want our children to leave our school believing and knowing that they have the tools and power to advocate for themselves and others, be activists in the world in a variety of topics, and ensure that their voices are heard, whether they are given a seat at the table or not.
And adding on to what you just said, or like a question in response to that, how do you and your staff approach teaching students about fairness, about respect, about going into their communities and becoming change makers?
Yeah, I believe that happens in a really organic and authentic way, and that starts with how we see our children and our families. And so we don't see our children and families as these empty vessels that are coming to us for us to like put knowledge into, but we see our children and families coming to us with a breadth of knowledge and experience and brilliance that we can learn from as adults, as children, as a community of learners. And so, first and foremost, we interview and ask families to share their interest and their expertise and invite them to our school to share that with our school community at large. In addition, we carefully cultivate our classroom libraries to ensure that the books that we surround our children in are culturally and around are culturally responsive, are, you've heard this phrase, windows and mirrors for our children. And really ensuring that the vast majority of the books in our classroom are showcasing experiences of historically marginalized or under-resourced communities, as the majority of books that our children across our school are being exposed to. In addition, there's actually some really great resources that New York City Public Schools have put out around different topics. We piloted and spearheaded the Black Studies curriculum. We really love the Civics for All program, which is literally about supporting and nurturing children to become activists and agents for social change. They also created other curricula around LGBTQI plus lessons and learning and experiences, and just a vast, diverse curricula to choose from, which has been really exciting. And then I'll say really important is the professional development that our staff has received. Part of that professional development has included some really difficult Sorry, they're running a drill. See, we're still in a school. But it's just a drill, so we're okay. Really important is to have those courageous conversations as a staff around being very unapologetic as to what our vision and mission is as a school community, and then ensuring that our staff feel supported to move towards that mission and vision. I'll just say very transparently, everyone comes into our school or enters our school in a different place, right? Whether that's a family and a child or a staff member. And it's not our job to necessarily like tear them down and tell them what they don't know or how they need to change, but provide the tools and the support and the nurturing, whether they're a child or an adult, to get to a point where we're growing as human beings and how we see each other and how we treat each other. And so a big part of that has been the learning that us as adults have gone through to really get to know who we are, what our identities are, how we identify, how our biases impact how we show up to work every day in a school, and then ensuring that where our biases may cloud the work that we're really trying to do, that we're attentive to that and trying to be change makers ourselves, you know? I hope that answered your question.
Oh, absolutely, it does.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I'm interested in you talking more about the learning modalities that are used to your school because you mentioned that your school takes a really serious approach to teaching students in a more humane way where you use knowledge as just the base of their knowledge of their education. So I was wondering if you could go more into the teaching modalities that
Yeah.
teachers use with the students in the classrooms.
Yeah, I mean, in the most basic level, I know the purpose of school is to teach children, you know, we think of teaching, we think of academics, but it's also to teach children how to be around people who may be different than them or the same
Hmm.
in terms of different identity markers. Some of the most important work that we do, especially at the beginning of each school year, but then throughout the year also, are restorative practices through means like morning meetings. So every single class in our school has morning meeting every morning for the first 20 minutes or so of the day. It's a way for all the children and adults to come together. There's no hierarchy of power or power dynamics. Everyone is sitting at the rug in a circle, sharing out an answer to the question. They're also talking pieces. Children are able to share how they're feeling, maybe an event that's taken place or something that's on their mind that they need the community support on. And it's just a really beautiful way that everyone starts the day. Through that as well is the idea of our restorative circles when there's a disagreement, when harm has happened. I think a lot of times people believe that a human rights education or people who are striving around social justice and education are looking for a utopia. And the truth of the matter is, without conflict, there's no growth, right?
Yeah.
And so we don't want a conflict-free school. What we want are tools and methods in which to address conflict as they come up. And so part of our restorative justice and restorative circles that we do really are surround itself around this idea of empathy. And so our staff and our children work really, really hard to teach empathy. What does empathy look like? Model empathy. Why is empathy important? How does empathy help us to be a better friend and better human being and neighbor to others? And so empathy is a big key also, I'll say, throughout the work that we're doing. We have had 0 suspensions for the last few years. It's not something that we believe in as a school, as a productive practice. We also know that there are biases that we have as adults in how Black boys and Black girls are looked at versus other demographics of children. And so all those things kind of mix together in a way that we really feel is how we look at children. And to your question, Jose, how we see children and who they are when they show up to our school is extremely important. We don't see ourselves as better than, higher than, holier than the children who are sitting before us. We see ourselves as equals. And I think that's a real shift from how other schools kind of operate with the hierarchy of like demanding of respect or needing for this to happen in order for that to happen. I don't need for a child to treat me in a certain way in order for me to be able to treat a child a certain way, especially if they're having a bad day or they're experiencing different things. That isn't the qualifier for how I'll show empathy and love or our staff to children. And so our children, you know, like I said, aren't coming to us as empty vessels in terms of the educational part, and they're certainly not coming to us as empty vessels through the social emotional part. And so I think to your question, which I hope I'm answering, is we're doing like really grassroots, like authentic work to build the relationship between the adults and children between the adults and children in our school. Because without that, there won't be the way of building in the academics after that. And then in terms of academics and what children and families are bringing in, children have experiences every day. They walk down the street in front of their home or to the nearest bodega or whatever it is. They're having a learned experience or an experience that can affect the learning of others in a really positive way. And so we try to incorporate that every day into the learning. Really quick, another example is we do follow different curriculum schedules and things like that. But we also really value emergent curriculum, which is this idea that kids will come to us with ideas of things that they want to learn and study about. And so something that makes our school really special is every single day, not just like Friday afternoons as a celebration, but every single day, every class, again, pre-K through fifth grade, have what's called work choice time, which is a whole period every single day where they are basically in control of their learning 100%. So they're picking a topic or idea that they feel strongly about or interested about, or maybe just that day it pops into their head. And they're getting to learn about whatever that might be through a variety of modalities, whether it's art or music or computers or hands-on building with blocks or Legos, or recording each other for a show that they're going to put on. And that happens every single day in our school. And I also think that really speaks to this idea that our children come to us with amazing ideas, and we want to make sure that we're watering and nurturing those ideas within our school community.
As a follow-up question, sorry I'm interrupting, but I think I'm really interested in the relationship that both between the teacher and the students have, as well as the students, and this kind of grassroots approach, like you mentioned, has on the students. So I was wondering if you could maybe talk about the effects that you've seen that this education has on the students and maybe their progress as they go through the years, maybe compared to other kids that you may know of in high schools that take a different approach to teaching.
So we're one of very, I don't know, not very few, but schools, especially in our community, I think, that don't do uniforms. We don't have the kids walk in a boy-girl line. We don't, have them walk in straight lines silently. Our children call us by our first name. So kids will come in and say, "Hi, Al." And sometimes it's an adjustment for their parents because they haven't had that educational experience. They had an educational experience where they were subject to respecting and showing respect for an authority figure. And supposedly the way you do that is by saying, "Hello, Mrs. So-and-so," or, staying quiet or with your arms at your side or whatever those like kind of ridiculous things are that sometimes we enforce at a school, especially in elementary school. And so definitely, I think even on the most basic level, not having a uniform and then explaining why to families and children we don't have uniforms helps build relationships before they even come to our school, right? So I'm thinking like new families before they're even here. We've had many conversations about where uniforms come from, this idea of the prison to school school to prison pipeline, and how something as simple as uniforms is a representation of stripping someone's individuality away, and part of an institution. This idea, again, going to your question, Jose, of how we build relationships with children is this idea as not calling me Yael changes the power dynamics between a child and an adult. And I think it interrupts what should be natural in terms of relationship building between adults and children, where everyone feels as though they're an equal and equitable member of a community. Once those power dynamics are kind of stripped away, then children feel more comfortable to take risks. They feel more comfortable to be their authentic selves, whoever that might be. And it also leads to trust, to know that the adults around them truly love them and care for them. I know, Monisha, you were here in our school. I don't think there's a day that goes by where I don't hear an adult tell a child, "I love you so much," or vice versa. It's just the community that we want to build here where children truly feel loved. And I think the grassroots part of that is just like, it's a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of effort to build those relationships in the same time and space that you're getting pressure to build those test scores, right? Mm-hmm. So in the same vein of, we want children leaving here being amazing readers and writers because we know, and mathematicians and scientists, because we know that will help them in their crusade and work towards activism and agents for social change. We also know that the most basic part of being an advocate, and to your point about human rights, is being a good person. And so if we're not modeling that as adults and we're not expressing that as adults to children and showing them what we want to see and how I feel respected when, you're not yelling at me and when you're speaking to me in a way that makes me feel safe. Well, we have to do that too then as adults, right? Or children are hearing a message and they're smart enough to know, well, why are you able to do it and not me? And so how that shows up is we have far less incidences in our school of fights and, serious issues that other schools across the nation, I'd say, face. And it affects academics directly because when children feel safe and loved in a community, when they feel that they can take risks, when they know that the people and adults around them have high expectations that come from a place of knowing that that child has the potential for greatness, regardless of any challenges that they may be experiencing, then we see the effect of that in their academic output as well. And I'll say it's no coincidence that our school has some of the lowest behavior or reports related to behavior in the city and some of the highest test scores. And those two things that I believe, go hand in hand. And a little side note, I know Mia and Jose, you don't know our school directly, but we don't believe in the state test in the sense of that being a predictor or indicator of a child's, brilliance or potential. And yet our children do really, really well on the state test because, again, they're given that freedom and space to not feel that pressure that is a deciding factor as to who they are. And so that was a really long answer for we really love on our children. We see them as our own children. I have 3 kids, 2 of whom go to our school here. And somebody who came would never know that those were my 2 biological children because all of the children here should be treated and loved on from the adults as family.
Thank you so much for that answer.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel so grateful to have gotten to hear about your school structure. I feel like I definitely didn't grow up with that
Yeah.
kind of school structure, and so I think it's really important and so amazing to think about a school that is run like that, and I hope that more schools can be run like that.
Can
And
I
I
can I add one more thing? I'm so sorry.
yeah, of course, no.
To your point, we had 2 visitors today, and someone asked, why did I become a principal? And my answer to that is because I hated school. And I really never felt seen or heard or appreciated or understood at school. It wasn't a place that I can have this recollection of I loved this teacher or I had these amazing friendship experiences or things like that. And so when I was thinking about my career trajectory, I was like, how can I stick it to all these adults that doubted me all these years when I was at school and made my life miserable and put me in detention and said that I was bossy or aggressive or whatever it was because I was a young woman who was like, this is what I want and what I need. And how can I create this kind of play space and place of joy for kids who I felt like I could relate to, who hadn't had positive experiences in school, or even more so, their parents had not had positive experiences. And so once I saw that you could do that in a little classroom with 25 to 30 kids, it's great to know that we can do that at the school level also.
Yeah, and yeah, I feel like a lot of kids, including myself even, would agree with you about how they felt when they were in school. So I think this structure is just so wonderful. And I guess one of our last questions is looking toward the future. What kinds of learning experiences do you hope K to 12 schools will prioritize to create students who will go on to be respectful and engaged members of society, especially because you were saying how, even though your school maybe has different structures to how traditional schools might be, they have actually better test scores and better behavioral reports. And, it seems like it actually has a more positive outcome.
I think my hope is that our children are not discouraged by how the adults are feeling right now in the world that we live in. I think our children come to school with things weighing heavily on their shoulders because they go home and they see their parents crying at home, or they see their parents fearful that they'll be picked up by ICE, or their friends will not be in school the next day, or the fear of, all these things that children, let alone adults, but children should not have to worry about. And I think my hope for the future is that more schools and teachers and principals see their work as social justice work, that they see their work as needing to set up safe spaces for children for us to pass on the baton to children to do the work that we have yet been able to do as adults. I hope that more schools will think about the way in which, at the most fundamental levels, they're holding their kids back, preventing their children from taking risks, and even the simple thing of a uniform, or the simple idea that kids should sit in desks by themselves. Those are such simple things that we could change in the next, 5 years or so, that would have such a huge impact on how children feel at school. So I think those are kind of the bucket areas that I'm looking at, but I really hope that in the next few years we just get more children who love going to school. I'll say in the last 2 months, we've probably gotten around 6 or 7 kids from other schools where their families are like, I'm at my wit's end. This is my last hope to try your school that my kid will feel safe in, and affirmed, and free to be who they are, and not, nervous to come to school. And I'm really happy that for each of those kids, we were able to provide that. But it can't just be a few schools. It has to be the overwhelming majority. Every child has to be able to feel that way. Every parent and caregiver has to be able to feel that way. And the last thing I'll say about that too is it really starts with you all. It has to happen at the college level, at the teacher preparation level, when teachers are going to school. There's not enough time. I'm so happy you guys are taking this class on human rights, but that's not like the norm across the country, right? How are we preparing young adults to become the next group of leaders who will be teachers and principals and coaches and whoever else? And what are they being told is valued in a school? And how are they being exposed to the human rights part, to social justice, to know again that when they are taking on these roles and agreeing to provide this service for children and families, that they do so in the hopes that they'll be able to change the trajectory around social justice and issues that are affected by social justice in our country and world. So I think those are my big bucket hopes, and no pressure on y'all or anything.
In addition to Principal Yale, we also spoke to Paula Abriel, an Arthur Zankel Fellow at Columbia University's Teachers College, who has been actively involved in implementing human rights education curricula across schools in Manhattan, the Bronx, and Queens. Her work focuses explicitly on empowering newcomer, immigrant, refugee, and asylum-seeking students by combining human rights education with socio-emotional learning and literacy support. One of the approaches brought to these schools includes Paulo Freire's pedagogy, a mechanism of human rights through education that emphasizes the importance of challenging oppressive structures and using education as a tool for empowerment and liberation. This program aims to make human rights knowledge both informative and transformative, especially for students who have faced interruptions in their traditional education.
Do you mind introducing yourself and explaining your role as a Zankel Fellow in implementing human rights education in New York City schools?
Sure. So my name is Paola Auril. I am a second-year master's student in the International and Comparative Education program. I specifically study international educational development, and the cluster that I'm in is called Human Rights, Peacebuilding, and Emergencies. My role is working alongside another co-coordinator. The first year, it was a PhD student who is now doing her field work. And this year, it's with another PhD student, and who I think you guys emailed as well. Essentially, the program is run under Dr. Garnet Russell. It's focused on a couple of different schools, but the school that I work at specifically is a school that receives a lot of newcomer students. They're in middle school, and so my role essentially is to kind of coordinate that program to give after-school tutoring to the students. So for the last 2 years, the first year, the days that we've been at the school has varied a little bit. But essentially we're there at least 2 days a week, with a group of about 30 student tutor volunteers from across Columbia University. And we've had varying numbers of, middle school students that we, work with. I think in my first year, it was like between 60 and 80 students. This year, it's been around 30 to 50. And so essentially the program and my role in coordinating the program is training or well, recruiting tutors, training tutors, and then kind of like managing the day-to-day operations of making sure that like everybody is where they need to be and there are no issues with like the tutoring and stuff. And just coordinating with the school directly as well. And tutoring myself.
Oh my goodness, that sounds amazing. You mentioned that the students that you work with are newcomer students. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what this means?
Yeah, definitely. So we use the term newcomer. We've used also before like asylum seeking, refugee students. Essentially, the students that we serve are primarily students who have arrived, like are recently arrived in the country. So students who have, I mean, it just depends. Like students may have been here for a week or a month or a year or 2 years. But yeah, that's what we mean by newcomer students. Most of our students are from Latin American countries, so big population from Venezuela, from Colombia, from Peru, Mexico, Haiti, Cuba, Dominican Republic. This a wide array of students.
And of the students that you work with, why do you think it's important to bring human rights education to them specifically?
I think especially in the political climate that we're in right now, it's especially relevant for the students to know what their rights are and that they have a right to education, that they have a right to freely speak their minds and express themselves, even though we see crackdowns on dissent now. And I think that, yeah, I think because of their immigration status, especially they benefit greatly from learning about human rights and what that means for them.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the curriculum structure over the course of the school year?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's varied a little bit in the last couple of semesters that I've been at the school. That depends both on me and the other co-coordinator and kind of like the kind of partnerships that we have. So in the first year, it was mostly the like development, like it was co-created curriculum. So we would come to the school, we would speak with the students, we'd prompt them to tell us kind of what kind of things they want to learn about in like English class, which is like kind of how they refer to our program. Um, and so they would tell us like, we want to learn about food, or we want to learn about sports, or we want to learn about how to order at the bodega, like any kind of thing like that. And so we would kind of craft the curriculum for that semester around those like big topics that they would ask. Then the last semester, not in the spring, but in the fall, we partnered with a class at Teachers College in like the curriculum and teaching department, and that the students in that class did conducted like classroom observations, did research, and helped us craft a curriculum for this semester around the themes that we've generally worked, which is like social emotional learning, human rights education, and the like through like English as like a medium of instruction.
And how do you introduce human rights to the students that you work with in a way that feels relevant to their everyday lives?
I think the best way to kind of put it is like our work is focused on kind of giving them scenarios or also us like we kind of come up with it too. Like there's the partners who came up with the curriculum, but we also make adjustments along the way and kind of get feedback from our tutors as well of like how we can make it better. I think it's just kind of making it context specific and relevant. So like let me think of an example. Like we talk about like for like the right to education, for example, that was like a big topic that we had in the last couple of weeks. So like prompting the students think about what education means to them, what it means to them to be able to go to school, and like asking them directly, like, why do you think it's important to go to school? And like obviously like they're kids and like they're between like 11 and 13 or sometimes even 14. So like they'll have differing answers. Some of them don't want to go to school, some of them like do. But I think kind of focusing our time with the students, which is usually just like an hour, on having them like reflect a little bit on like what it means to them and why it's important to them. I think that's the way that we kind of go about it to make sure that it's relevant to them, just like prompting them to apply what we learn in like the worksheet to their day-to-day lives.
Amazing. And what have you enjoyed the most about implementing human rights education in the classrooms that you've worked with?
There's so many things. Like, uh, I think it's like the little moments and the little stories that we get in like giving the lesson. So like I remember, I think it was the first day of this semester. Like I'll very much remember the first day and the last day of the semester. Because the first day of the semester, I was working with a group of students, and I don't remember the topic that we were talking about. But something about kind of like getting to know each other and talk about like our goals, our dreams, our aspirations, that kind of thing. And one of the girls told me, she asked me, she was like, Miss, like what happens if we don't learn English? And I was like, don't worry, like that's why we're in this like session, it's like after school session, like you'll be fine. Like don't worry, you'll learn English. And she was like, but like what would happen like if we went to high school and we didn't know? And I was like, well, it depends on the high school. Obviously, like there are additional supports depending on where you go, et cetera, et cetera. And then she like thinks about it herself and she's like, actually, Miss, like somebody before me has probably done it. And if they haven't done it, then I'll be the first to do it. And like, it was that like moment of like kind of seeing her like see herself in a way that she was empowered. And I guess like empowered maybe isn't the right word, but seeing herself as like, actually, like, this isn't going to be a barrier because I want to learn. And like, if I'm not able to right now, like, I know I'll be able to in the future. So that was a really special moment. And just like those kind of interactions, like in our last class or my last session, which was last week, we were talking about, again, like growth mindset and kind of like, obviously not explicitly, but just kind of prompting them to think about times when they've persevered. And one of the discussion questions was like, have you ever had a situation where maybe you faced an obstacle or there was a barrier in the way or like something that you've overcome and you kind of kept going? And the two girls I was talking to literally told me they were like, coming to this country. And we have goals and we have dreams and that's why we're here. And like, we're just going to keep chugging along and pushing forward. And that like absolutely warmed my heart. So I think it's those moments that I enjoy the most is like seeing the realization in them that like they can fulfill their rights and they can see them be realized. I think is really special.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Just for clarification, for the human rights education program that you're implementing, what is its overarching goal for these students?
I mean, it's not like a formal like thing in itself. I think like broad strokes, the idea is that they feel like they have kind of like the tools or the knowledge or the know-how to go out into the world and know what their rights are, and kind of act on them accordingly. So yeah, I think like generally that's what it is. There's not like a specific like they need to know at least three of their rights by the time that they graduate middle school. So yeah, it's kind of more broad of like, can they like reference this and what does that mean for them?
And then when you were implementing human rights education in the schools that you worked with, were there any challenges that you faced?
I mean, there are always challenges. I think in the before times, we had few tutors and very large groups of students, and so it was kind of hard to get everybody engaged. Now that we have like more tutors and smaller groups of students, it's not so difficult, in terms of like just like the one-on-one attention. But I think the topic is still kind of hard to get across sometimes because it feels a little abstract and ephemeral. Obviously, like again, like we try our best to kind of apply it and have them apply it to their context. Like one student, I was telling him like he had to like come to another classroom with me. He's like, Miss, but I have rights. And I was like, yes, but like we have to go to this classroom. Like I need you to help me out here. So it's like that kind of thing.
And for clarification, the tutors that you're mentioning, so they're tutors who help newcomer students with English in addition to also helping with the implementation of human rights education.
So the idea is that we teach human rights education in English. So like the kids call it like English class, but the focus is on social emotional learning and human rights.
Got it. And then what is the role of the tutors that you mentioned earlier? Like, what do they do?
So we have like the curriculum that we develop and we send it out to them every week. We have like a lesson plan that is like an adjoining piece of that. Before the session, we'll go over all of the materials, answer any questions that people have. And then when we go upstairs to the school and we'll be in like the classroom, we'll separate the tutors into like small groups with students and they will like with the worksheet that we've given them, they'll like carry out XYZ activity. So like it could be bingo, it could be a crossword, it could be like a worksheet that's got like space for like reading and writing and drawing. So that's what the tutors do. They kind of like implement the curriculum directly.
Right.
Sorry, I just have a
Oh, go
question
ahead.
about teachers. So are they also like previously have like knowledge about human rights education, or are they educated in that aspect beforehand? Or in general, like maybe just more abstract in human rights? Or are they also like learning as they go, like learning to adapt these curriculums into their
Well, we offer a training at the beginning of the semester, and this semester, because of the partnership that we had, we were able to do an asynchronous training, which had like important tenets of human rights education, as well as social emotional learning. And then we had an in-person training to kind of apply those in different scenarios. So from like our standpoint, like they have that background that we've given them. Aside from that, like it's kind of variable between like their interests and like what they've studied.
And I believe we're at our last two questions. Looking ahead, do you envision human rights education being adopted in more K through 12 public schools and higher education institutions in New York City? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think in some ways, we talked to the school about this at some point. I don't recall exactly when. Um, the way that they address human rights isn't like explicitly human rights, like using that language and that terminology. They kind of talk about it a little more as like, we foster a culture of respect here, and we are inclusive of everybody, and we are this, that, and the other thing. So. I feel like in some schools that already kind of exists. I hope it is adopted in more schools. I think it would be a great benefit, especially considering everything that's been going on recently. So definitely, definitely think that it's something that should be adopted in more schools and higher education as well.
Absolutely. And what steps do you think are necessary to ensure that human rights education becomes a more integral part of the curricula and education that New York City public schools are providing?
That's a good question. I think with anything, when it comes to education reform or like introductions to the curriculum, it has to be like a whole community approach. So like it can't just be the school and the teachers and the principal, like the parents have to be involved, because it's one thing for us to say like human rights, human rights, human rights when they're at school, and then they go home and their parents are like, that's not real.
Mhm.
So I think it's worthwhile to engage families as much as possible whenever you're trying to make sure that a curriculum is effective. So yeah, I think that would help.
And Rebecca De Jose, did you have any other questions you'd like to add?
Not really. I just think the work that you do is so interesting. And like, as someone who also like, I grew up kind of wanting to go into the education field. So seeing how like, but now I'm a human rights major, seeing how the
Hmm.
intersect is really interesting, and how you guys are really working to implement that, especially in K through 12 education, because we learned about how important like that crucial age for them growing up, learning about yeah, thank you.
After interviewing both Principal Yale and Paula Abreu, my group and I reflected on the importance of interactive and engaging learning styles that ground global human rights frameworks into local educational practices through personalized curricula that incorporate students' lived experiences, emphasize their needs, and allow students to have a say in how their learning is guided. Going forward, it is important to consider how human rights education can be adapted to various communities, continuously evolving to meet students where they are, and empowering them to actively participate in advocating for their rights and those of their communities. Human rights education does not just benefit certain individuals, it benefits everyone. Now the question is, how do we make human rights education more widespread and accessible to all individuals? How can we reimagine education as a driving force for human rights and social justice?